Welcome to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein, a mom of three and an Emmy Award-winning journalist, really excited to connect with experts about the ups, the downs, and all the in-betweens of parenting. And today we are talking about a pretty cool topic. It's really intriguing, birth order. And before we get to that, we do want to give a big thanks to our new sponsor, MaineHealth, for helping us to connect with all these really interesting and smart guests that we get to connect with each and every week. So let's talk about birth order and really kind of think about it. How do you fit into your own family dynamic? Maybe you're thinking about it more recently with the holidays and all the family gatherings and all the fun that can be. And then, of course, how is it playing out with your own kids? Whether you're the oldest, the youngest, the middle, or only, birth order can really help to shape who you are, who your kids are. But there's one thing to keep in mind. It really is just one piece of that personality puzzle, which we are going to learn about today. We are chatting with family therapist, longtime family therapist, Rebecca Hoffmann. She is a regular guest here on Raising Me and just such a great resource for us. She is currently the director of MaineHealth Center for Trauma, Resilience, and Innovation. And so we're going to talk about the various things that can really help to shape a personality along with birth order. We're going to talk about sibling rivalries and how we can use the information that we learned today to help foster stronger relationships between our kids and with our kids. Check it out. Rebecca, I am so glad to have you actually in our podcast studio today. This is so exciting.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of our great guests, and we're talking about birth order, which is such a fascinating, interesting topic, but there's also some seriousness to it as well. Can we just talk about this birth order theory?
Sure. That's exactly what it is. It's a theory that really came about in the 1800s. It was Alfred Adler that proposed that there was something to birth order that impacted personality. And over the years, it has actually been quite a controversial topic in the psychology world, where some believe, and there's been a lot of research, that there are so many other factors impacting a child that it really dilutes birth order. There are just family culture, there's innate genetics and personality, there's race, ethnicity, all these other things that kind of wash away birth order. But as a family therapist myself, I believe there's something to it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's little or big, that it does, where you fall in your family system in relation to your other siblings does impact parts of who you become.
I mean, just think about, like we were just talking about, we both happen to be eldest daughters in our family, and there are characteristics in general. I mean, obviously we're speaking in generalities because there are so many other factors as you discussed, but let's talk about some of those general characteristics associated with firstborn, secondborn, baby, and also only children too. So starting with the eldest, whether son, daughter, what are some of the general characteristics?
Sure. And eldest and only child have some similarities and some differences. But the idea with an eldest child, if you think back to, and we were talking about really thinking back to culture in the last even 100 or so years, that the eldest child was really kind of the next parent, right? So they were given a lot of responsibility. They were kind of expected when they were younger children coming into the family to parent those children. So even as of today, eldest children are often more responsible, more driven, more independent, more able to take things on themselves, less flexible, more rigid, because they don't, when they're an only child for a period of time, they come into the family as an only child. They have all of their parents' attention, and they don't necessarily have to be flexible because there's younger kids already, or there's kids already there in the family. So you see some rigidity in thought sometimes, and inability to kind of go with the flow. again, and I will say this disclaimer with everything, is that there are a lot of factors, for example, gender, socioeconomic status, cultural background, racial background, that have huge implications on these generalities.
And how so? So we're talking specifically about the eldest right now. We'll
Yep.
get into the middle and the youngest as well. But how would race or culture or socioeconomic factors impact a birth order?
Sure. So I'll just take a couple of those, for example. So gender, for example, the way we raise boys is different than the way we raise girls, even if we try our best.
Yep. No, that's fair and that's honest. Yeah.
Yep. We try, even if we try completely a non-gendered approach to raising a child, they grow up in a world where they're given messages all the time about what boys do and girls do. And many parents, me included, try to sort of push away from that and try to raise and I have 2 boys, so I don't have any comparison with girls. I know you do. So I try to raise them in a way that says this is what good children do. This isn't just what boys do or girls do. But the world does tell them that they're supposed to be a certain way. So that does impact birth order.
I would say supposed to be and supposed to like certain things. Like I do have, my eldest is my daughter, and then I have 2 boys. But my youngest had recently come home from preschool and saying, well, girls like pink and boys like blue. And I was like, actually, no, that anybody can like pink. Anybody can like blue. That was a message that a child in his class had conveyed. And so when you're hearing those messages from friends or in and just in society, those are hard to overcome sometimes.
Right. And in books, in popular kids shows, it's everywhere. And when you really look for it, you see it everywhere. And you see that your job as a parent is to overcome this, mass influence that is very powerful. And many parents do it. And it's incredible how hard they work to sort of raise their child to be who they are, not based on societal pressures. But those societal pressures are there no matter what. When those kids walk into preschool or, kindergarten, they're going to feel them.
You almost feel like I've noticed that I use sort of birth order as a personality description. Like, oh, my daughter, a typical type A firstborn child. Or like when you're like, I wonder if they're the baby of the family. When you're like meeting somebody or trying to assess somebody. So that's kind of interesting that it becomes like characteristics and in general of people, really. So when it comes to a middle child, what are some of the general characteristics for a middle?
So a middle child, I'm a middle child, so I can speak from experience. Eldest daughter, but middle child is
got a double whammy there.
I know, is that it's sort of the middle child syndrome everyone's heard of, where you're kind of lost. Like you kind of don't have a role in the family. You've got your eldest child and your youngest child, and those middle kids are trying to figure out what's their role? Where do they stand? Who are they? And so people talk about middle child syndrome kind of negatively, like, the poor middle child, but those children actually often have to seek their identity outside the family. So it can make them more independent, more social, more able to build relationships with friends and others because their role in the family is a little more nebulous than maybe the older or the youngest. And so there are some real positives to that, flexibility, that sort of thing.
I kind of see it too. And I've had this conversation with my son and I've said, well, you get to be the older brother and the younger brother. So it kind of try to spin it in that way. But I think it's true. Like, I think speaking to the flexibility part, you have to sort of navigate both of those worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And on the sort of downside, you kind of don't know where you fit, but that can be a positive because you find and you develop and you identify yourself where you fit. And that can be a good skill for life.
Does birth order reset if there are a certain number of years in between kids? So for instance, I have my son being in the middle, but he's 6 years older than my youngest. So he did get to be the youngest through those key developmental years. Is there ever a time where, and I have several friends that have wide age gaps between their children, is there a certain number of years where that birth order sort of resets? You're the middle, but you're kind of also a youngest?
Yep.
Or,
Yep. So again, taking into account many factors, they say those birth order characteristics are kind of entrenched by age 6 to 8.
Okay.
So for example, if there's a 6-year age difference, that's kind of a someone who's been a youngest child during the time where birth order actually impacts that child. Then when something happens, like another child's born, or this is the one I think about all the time, is in a blended family.
Oh,
right?
I got the chills.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Navigating that, of course.
And that's really hard stuff for those kids to
Yes.
navigate because they've both, let's say, been first children, eldest children, and then they're both eldest children, but one is actually older than, it just really confuses, it just disrupts the family system, which many things through life are going to disrupt a family system. There's so many things that could happen that disrupt a family system, and it's all about how the family redefines and resettles itself, and even notices that, let's say, a child is struggling and maybe we don't understand it's because they've kind of lost their place in the family or their birth order, but how can we help that child resettle and find their place in this family? Because there's a role for everyone in the family and everyone's going to take a certain role, but it's going to have to be reshuffled and redefined when a family is blended.
And then there's the youngest.
Yes.
Let's talk about being the youngest. What are some of the general characteristics of being the youngest and how that plays into the family?
So our youngest children, I always think back to my family of origin with 6 children.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Right.
And
okay.
Our youngest was our wild child. He was fun. He is still fun. He's an adult now, but they are often less independent because they don't have to be, right? They've got older siblings who are maybe taking care of them, helping them out. They've got lots of moms maybe, or dads or whatever it might be to help them. So they can be just more fun, more engaging, more like socially out there, just kind of living
their best life. I got to tell you, we have parented our 16-year-old much different than we have parented our nearly 6. Part of it, he's nearly 6. We have grown and learned a lot as parents, but also we're different people. And, we talk about, race and culture can impact personality, just like birth order and sort of scrubbing that out. But parenting styles, I mean, would impact the birth order relationships too.
Yes. And again, talking sort of traditionally, I think I go back to my own experiences as you do. When you're a first parent, you're often very anxious too, right?
Yeah, and very by the book. Like, we're supposed to do this, and you're supposed to be at bed at 7:00, and you don't get up until 6:00 or what. All the things you're quote unquote supposed to do, we did.
Right.
That. Yeah.
Right. And so that child is like learning, like there are certain ways to do things. And that's why you see rigidity. And then with your third, you're like,
good guy.
He'll fall asleep on the couch.
It'll be fine. Well, you don't have to. I mean, we've had evenings like that. I mean, very rarely, because we still do, the whole bedtime routine with the books and all that kind of stuff. But I can't remember a single evening that with Livy, our oldest, we'd be like, oh, she'll be fine if she just falls asleep on the couch. We're having conversations with friends in the dining room and all that kind of stuff. But, Jack, I can think of several times just off the top of my head that we're like, he'll be fine.
And he is, right?
He's just fine.
Just fine.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about the youngest too is that, and I think again about my youngest brother, and this is so true, is they're often actually really adept and skilled at or even competitive at things like sports or other things because they're trying to be like their older siblings, right? And so they're trying to be they're trying to be just as good at soccer as their older sister or whatever it might be. And so they end up being pretty skilled at whatever they want to do because they're used to trying really hard to be good at things.
How do you find birth order, or in general, how does birth order impact like life choices? Like, is an eldest more likely to go into a career like, or an only, or a middle more likely to go into a career like, or a youngest, the same kind of thing? Are there sort of patterns? Again, we're speaking in
Sure.
generalities here, but where one personality might gravitate toward.
Yeah. So, oldest children and only children are often high achievers, right? They've been sort of the oldest children and only children, like their focus of their parents, and their success is the focus of their parents solely when there's not other children there. And so you do see those kids as high achievers. There is a significant research about only children in particular and how they are often high achieving adults. And it's really, again, they're all a parent's or multiple parents focuses on that child and their success. So it would make sense. There's also a lot of pressure for those kids, a lot of pressure. And then what I can say from knowing that, let's say, like middle children are often really good at relationships. So I would expect they would go into careers where relationships are important, where making, even could be sales, could be healthcare, where connecting with others is an important skill because they have learned to be very good at that skill. And the youngest,
who knows?
Right. That would be a guess.
But personality, like I could see my youngest, I mean, going into like sales. He's so good with people, and he is not afraid of anything.
Yes.
Just something where those relationships are
right.
also
Right. They're not timid.
Personality driven for sure.
Absolutely.
I just wonder too about like sibling dynamics when it comes to birth order. Does birth order tend to impact like the sibling dynamic, like where one might get along better with another in the combo there?
I would say that's so much dependent on personality traits and gender and age difference, more so than birth order. But often what you do see is that eldest child is being parentified, trying to parent those younger children, and they don't want to be parented by their older sister or brother. And so that can create tension. Or, the oldest child being taught to be fairly rigid. And then you've got the youngest sort of swinging from the rafters, right? And that can cause tension between those.
So how, as parents, can we just foster healthy relationships between our kids?
So in terms of fostering healthy relationships, I think it's really sort of taking all these factors into account and saying, like you and I have talked about, so we have these eldest children, and what are things that we're seeing that are typical of eldest children that are positive and nurturing those things? And what are typical things about eldest children, factors that are kind of maybe being barriers to them or holding them back, and trying to help remove those. Like, no, you aren't a parent. You don't have to be the parent. Let me be the parent. You can be a kid and have fun. And trying to really like foster the parts of their personality that maybe have gotten a little stifled based on where they were born into a family.
So are there strategies or, interventions if families are struggling with birth order or sibling relationships, in this way where the eldest wants to parent and the youngest is like, I'm not having it, or whatever the dynamic may be, but just sort of fostering, any strategies that could help with making sure that the relationships between the kids, regardless of the birth order, are healthy and positive. I mean, that's ultimately what I think we would all want for our kids.
Absolutely. In terms of fostering good relationships, I would almost just take birth order out of the equation and say it's more about how we teach kids to interact with each other and to handle conflict, and to not put any child into a box based on anything, right?
Mhm.
Gender, birth order, any of those factors, and just say, how do we teach these children to love each other and to care about each other, and to try as best we can to remove sort of the unhealthy side of competitiveness, because I think that's what gets in the way a lot. And I think any parent can relate to kids being really sensitive to, well, mom, you let him have this, or mom, he got in trouble for, this is the one I get. I got in trouble for this, but he didn't get in trouble for the same.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that one.
Yeah.
Sure.
So like being sensitive to helping them be able to build a healthy relationship between the 2, 3, 4 of them, and learn, and using that as like a sort of a lab for life, right? Like they're going to have so many places in life where there's conflict and competitiveness and just even dislike. So like, for example, 2 firstborns in the world might sort of not do well together.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually it's interesting from the sort of systems thinking side of being a family therapist. There is research that has shown that firstborns most often are attracted to either middle or lastborns rather than being attracted to other firstborns, because everybody has a role in their family and you're not looking to be with somebody that has the same role or is comfortable in the same role. You're looking for somebody that fits into the role that you weren't in.
Going back to the rigidness. Right. Because this is how it's going to work.
And the family of origin. So somebody who has firstborn traits is not going to be attracted to those. They're going to be attracted maybe to somebody with middleborn or youngest born traits.
Isn't that interesting? And is it the same with middle and youngest, or because they might be a little bit more flexible?
No, it's true. They're attracted to more firstborn traits in a person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If there was one takeaway when it comes to birth order for parents to think about after they listen to the podcast, what would that be?
The one takeaway would be that coming from a family therapist is that I would say that there are so many factors that impact who your child is and who they're going to become. And birth order can certainly be a piece of that. So it's worth paying attention to how you are raising your eldest born versus your youngest born. And it doesn't have to be the same. It's just to have an awareness about it. And so do you have really high expectations of your eldest that are putting pressure on them that might result in anxiety that you aren't putting on another child? And just have an awareness about that and say, wow, like, why is it that I am putting so much pressure on my eldest? And do I need to maybe shift that a little bit, or maybe help them to learn to be more flexible, or maybe help my youngest to be a little less competitive, or foster that independence in my middle child who's looking for their place in the world. And so it's just about building awareness. What I would say, one thing I would say to your earlier question, one of the interventions that I would recommend if things become really hard around
sibling dynamics,
whether it's birth order or something else. And I really think about this for people that are blending a family in particular, is that family therapists, so people that are trained to be family therapists, are trained in family dynamics. So things like birth order, things like we call it systems theory, so that there's a system and everybody holds a role in that system. And so when you disrupt the system, those roles get all disrupted. And so family therapists can really help navigate some of those disruptions and help a family resettle in their new format. And so family therapy can be incredibly helpful for a family that's really feeling completely upended for whatever reason.
And that's no matter the age too, because
absolutely
this all plays a part, whether you're 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, whatever, or 18, 25, and 32 and beyond.
Exactly.
Rebecca, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We will have more resources on our website, wgme.com/raisingme. Loved having you in.
Thank you so much.
A big thank you to Rebecca, as always. And I really do think about these things quite often. I know we are different parents, and we are parenting our oldest much different than our youngest. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but we are learning. When we were younger and really had no idea what we were doing, and not that we're exactly experts right now, but by the third child and life experiences, you do kind of start to figure it out, at least chill out a little bit. And I do, there are times I do hold some guilt when it comes to that. I often describe my oldest as a typical type A firstborn daughter right out of central casting. And people know exactly what I mean when I say that. And I, keep in mind, I'm saying this as also a firstborn daughter myself, potentially could be described like that as well. And then my boys, it's so interesting. And I really thought about this more after the conversation with Rebecca that, with the 6-year age difference, I sometimes see the typical birth order characteristics kind of blend since my middle was the youngest for so many years. Like that part specifically about the youngest being competitive. I mean, yowza. These kids, you put them together, they can get so competitive. And let's just say, be careful if you challenge anyone to a game of Uno or Sorry at my house. You've been warned. In the end, though, it has been something that really has been top of mind a lot lately. It's just really acknowledging the differences of these kids and that we often really do have to be different parents to each of our kids and to recognize their strengths and opportunities for growth and figure out the best way to support them in that. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me and to MaineHealth, who is a sponsor of Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield and produced with Nate Eldridge. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, consider a positive rating and review so others can find it as well. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.